Folks, I don't know if you've seen the horrible images coming out of the Kabul airport as the Taliban have basically all but taken over all of Afghanistan, and maybe not even all but. President of Afghanistan in exile now. Taliban has declared that the Afghanistan war is over. And months ago, when Joe Biden announced this, I think I made a point at that time to say that this is going to be incredibly ugly. And I don't know that people anticipated, or even that I anticipated, that it would be this ugly on day one. But it's going to get uglier, too. And this was an inevitability. And if anything, it shows the folly of our presence there. It's a house of cards. And we got word of this a couple of years ago during the Trump administration. And that was in the release, I should say, of the Afghanistan papers, which made it quite clear that the military, that our politicians have been lying about any successes in that country for well over a decade, close to 2 decades of just lying to the American public. And no one wanted to be the guy, I mean, it's all been men, who wanted to have these images on the day that the American military left. And that's why it didn't happen before now. Now, that said, Donald Trump, and we will play this later in the show, made it quite clear that he wanted credit for ending this. Months ago, maybe close to a year ago now, the Trump administration made a deal with the Taliban to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners so that there would be less conflict there as a way of protecting Donald Trump's bid to be reelected. Many of those prisoners are now in the leadership of the Taliban. I don't know that that made a material difference for what we've seen in the pace of the fall. I think there was some notion that the Taliban would take over the entire country and not Kabul. But again, this was all just sort of, built on a foundation of sand. It was all a house of cards, however you want to express it. It's been a delusion. And it's a delusion that is being propagated by not only by the military, not only by some of our politicians, but also our media. Check out this clip of Jake Tapper just completely, and we're seeing this across the board, right? This massive failure for Joe Biden. The failure already existed. It was
a failure of United States imperialism.
Yes, the failure has been there for decades.
The war on terror,
the war on terror. I mean, there's multiple different ways you could slice this, right? You could have said that. You could say that it was a failure to invade Afghanistan from the beginning.
Instead of maybe Saudi Arabia.
Anywhere.
Not invading anywhere, but for Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11, we invaded Afghanistan.
But Bin Laden was in Afghanistan.
And then within weeks, we were able to get a surrender option from the Taliban.
Taliban said that they would be willing to hand over Bin Laden. Failure point number one. Failure point number two was to accept the surrender of the Taliban once you've invaded. Failure point number three was to leave all of your forces, to leave all of your resources, to pull them out of Afghanistan. Instead of building institutions, instead of building a some type of form. And I don't know if we could have done it, but certainly we weren't going to do it once the decision was made, which may have been made even before we went into Afghanistan, that we were going to pull all those resources from Iraq. And then the failure was by the Obama administration to come in and realize, like, this is a disaster. And are we going to put good money after bad, as it were? And it turned out we're going to put good money after bad.
And cost fallacy.
Well, at that point, Obama said that was the good war, right?
That was the good war. But when he got into office, he could have said, you know what? It turns out the good war is not working. But instead, that good money is just a euphemism for killing more civilians, losing more U.S. lives, and kicking the can down the road. Trump did the same exact thing. God knows what would have happened in May if he had been reelected, if he would have held, actually followed through on that. Nevertheless, here we are. And the U.S. media is making it as if this problem was a problem that developed in the past 2 months. Here is Jake Tapper interviewing Tony Blinken.
Secretary Blinken, thanks so much for joining us. Take a listen to what President Biden was saying less than 6 weeks ago.
Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy. The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Secretary Blinken, as you know, the Taliban has closed in on Kabul. We're evacuating the embassy, burning documents. Biden increased troops deploying to the country twice in 3 days just to rescue those there. This is not just about the overall idea of leaving Afghanistan. This is about leaving hastily and ineptly. Secretary Blinken, how did President Biden get this so wrong?
Jake, first, let's put this in context. And as we've discussed before, we were in Afghanistan for one overriding purpose, to deal with the folks who attacked us on 9/11. That's why we went there 20 years ago. And over those 20 years, we brought bin Laden to justice. We vastly diminished the threat posed by al-Qaeda in Afghanistan to the United States, to the point where it's not capable of conducting such an attack again from Afghanistan. We're going to keep in place in the region the capacity to see if any reemergence of a terrorist threat and to be able to deal with it. And on the terms that we went into Afghanistan in the first place, we've succeeded in achieving our objectives. When the president came to office, he had a decision to make. The previous administration negotiated an agreement with the Taliban that said that our forces, our remaining forces, only about 2,500, would be out of the country on May 1st. And the idea that the status quo could have been maintained by keeping our forces there, I think is simply wrong. The fact of the matter is, had the president decided to keep forces in Afghanistan beyond May 1st, attacks would have resumed on our forces. The Taliban had not been attacking our forces or NATO during the period from which the agreement was reached to May 1st. The offensive you're seeing across the country now to take these provincial capitals would have commenced.
In other words, there was no, did Joe Biden get it wrong, or was he lying? Could he have possibly said, no, it's going to collapse within moments as the planes take off. And we're probably going to have to fight our way out. If he had said that a month or two ago, would there be the will, or would, everyone on CNN or wherever it is, MSNBC, I'm sure there are same people who are complaining about the same thing on every single news network. We can't leave. We can't leave and have that happen. It was inevitable. There was no time that we could stay. We could stay there for another 20 years and it would be exactly the same.
We could have gone back in time and say we were going to occupy a country for 2 decades, actually use the over $1 trillion that we spent on the war, specifically in Afghanistan, to set up infrastructure, to set up institutions that would have created a government that would not have been so susceptible to kleptocracy and to the Taliban taking over so swiftly. It's an indictment of the premise that the United States' imperialist wars do anything except destroy that we saw this fold so immediately. If the United States wanted to occupy a nation for 20 years, and I disagree with that wholeheartedly, they could have spent that money on creating a government and structures and investments that wouldn't have led to this. But we didn't do that. We used that money to enrich defense contractors. It was a very profitable war. Afghanistan was just collateral damage for the looting of U.S. taxpayer dollars to go directly to Lockheed Martin and other defense contractors, Boeing, etc. So that's what this was. And it was a war of lashing out after 9/11. Bin Laden was located there. So Afghanistan, which already had faced the brunt of U.S. imperialism decades before, of course, just collateral damage. And then now the media, which supported those efforts decade after decade, turns around and say, well, what about the women and children of Afghanistan? What about people there? Yes, that's what we've been saying the whole time.
Okay, I just want to bring up, if we have time, how much, we're talking about if we're going to learn any lessons. This is the concept of the decent interval from Vietnam. Decent interval is a theory regarding the end of the Vietnam War, which argues that from 1971 or 1972, the Nixon administration abandoned the goal of preserving South Vietnam and instead aimed to save face by preserving a decent interval between withdrawal and South Vietnamese collapse. Therefore, Nixon could avoid becoming the first United States president to lose a war. Like, this seems to be like the main thing we're preoccupied in
Absolutely.
Wars. How do we save face when we retreat?
Absolutely. This is why Obama should have done this 10 years ago. And this is why it's happening now.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.